You are the most reliable person in the room, and that is slowly destroying you. Not the unreliable ones, not the selfish ones. You, the one who shows up, the one who answers, the one who absorbs the weight so smoothly that nobody even notices it's happening, including you. That's the thing nobody says out loud, that the people who get used the most are almost never the weak ones. They're the capable ones, the ones who figured out early that being needed felt like being valued, and spent years confusing the two. If that sentence just landed somewhere uncomfortable, stay with it. Because what we're going to work through today is not a list of advice. It's an anatomy. The actual structure underneath why you keep giving what you should have protected. Why the pattern repeats no matter how many times you recognize it, and what it's really costing you. Not in the obvious ways, but in the ways that are harder to name. The kind of cost that shows up as a low-level exhaustion you can't explain. A vague resentment you feel guilty for having. A life that functions well on the outside and feels slightly not yours on the inside. If you've been waiting for someone to break that down without dressing it up, subscribe now and stay close. This channel exists for exactly this. Now, let's start with the thing most people get wrong about why this happens. It is not weakness. That needs to be said clearly and early, because the story most people tell themselves when they recognize this pattern is that they're too nice, too soft, not firm enough, that if they just had more backbone, the problem would solve itself. But backbone isn't the issue. The issue is older than that, and it runs deeper. Think about what you were rewarded for when you were young. Not in some dramatic psychological sense, just practically, behaviorally. What got you approval? What made the adults in your life ease up, relax, look at you with something that felt like warmth? In almost every case, for the kind of person watching this, the answer is some version of the same thing. Being useful. Being easy. Not being a problem. Anticipating what people needed before they asked and delivering it before anyone had to feel uncomfortable. That was the skill. And it worked. It got you something that felt like safety. And the brain that learned that lesson never forgot it. Why would it? It worked. What nobody told you and what the reward system never showed you is what was accumulating on the other side of every yes. Every time you gave what should have been protected, you weren't just being helpful. You were teaching that person and every person who observed it what you cost. And the price you were setting was nothing, not because you're worthless, because you were behaving like someone who didn't believe they were allowed to have a price at all. And here is where it gets precise, because the problem isn't the people who take. The problem is that you've spent years building an identity around giving, around being the one who handles it, absorbs it, shows up for it. And somewhere along the way, protecting yourself started to feel like betraying yourself. Like if you say no, you're not being who you are. Like the boundary is a kind of failure. That belief is the mechanism, not the difficult people, not the demanding relationships. That belief is what makes the pattern self-sustaining. So let's go through it. 5 things. Not as a checklist, as a dissection. The first one is your time, and I know that sounds familiar, like something you've heard before. But I want to come at it from a different angle because the usual framing, your time is valuable, protect it, lands intellectually, and changes nothing. What actually matters is understanding what happens to you psychologically when your time is given away on demand. When someone can interrupt you casually, when they assume your availability, when the message comes and you feel that small pull of obligation before you've even read it fully. What's happening in that moment is not a scheduling conflict. It's a question being answered in real time. The question is, whose life takes priority right now? And every reflexive yes you give is an answer. The answer is theirs. Do that enough times, and you stop being the author of your days. You become the editor, the one who responds to what others produce. Your energy, which is finite and directional, stops moving toward what you're actually building and starts draining into whatever is most urgent for someone else. And the insidious part is that each individual instance seems small. It's just one call. It's just one favor. It's just a few minutes. but there is no such thing as a few minutes when it happens 16 times a day. There is only a life that is systematically not yours. The shift isn't about being unavailable. It's about being deliberate. Before you respond, there needs to be a pause, not a long one, just enough to ask one question internally. Is this mine to carry right now? And if the answer is no, the response doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be justified. A calm, short, complete sentence is enough. That doesn't work for me right now. I'll come back to this later. Not a negotiation. A statement. Watch what happens after. The people who respect you will adjust without drama. The people who were relying on your unconditional availability, and some of them didn't even know they were relying on it, will feel the friction. That friction is not a problem. That friction is information. The second thing you should never give away is your emotional labor. And this one is harder to name because it hides inside something that looks like love. Someone comes to you with their weight, their problems, their anxiety that doesn't move, their chaos that never resolves, their pain that circles the same few points and never seems to land anywhere. And you receive it, you listen, you hold it, and you tell yourself that this is what caring looks like. Sometimes it is, but pay attention to the direction of what's moving. After these conversations, do you feel like something was shared? Like two people moved through something together? Or do you feel like something was transferred? Like they arrived heavy and left lighter, and you're now carrying what they came in with? Because there is a version of this that is not intimacy. It is extraction. And the people caught in it almost never know they're caught. Because from the inside it looks like being a good friend. It looks like being there. And anyone who questions it, including you quietly at 2 in the morning when you're exhausted and can't explain why, gets told by their own conscience that they're being selfish. You are not a pressure valve. You are not a container for other people's unprocessed pain. And the care that costs you your clarity, repeatedly, without anything ever changing, without the person ever moving forward, that is not virtue. That is slow erosion dressed up as loyalty. Here is the thing that nobody says about chronic emotional overgiving. It doesn't just drain you. It actually makes you less capable of the inner work that matters most to you. You cannot think clearly about your own direction when your nervous system is perpetually saturated with someone else's anxiety. You cannot make clean decisions when you're running on emotional empty. The fog you feel, that low-level depletion that doesn't seem to have a source, often has a very specific source. It's the accumulated weight of emotions that were never yours, that you kept picking up, because nobody told you that you were allowed to put them down. You are allowed to put them down. That doesn't mean abandoning people. It means understanding the difference between supporting someone and absorbing them. You can be present without being porous. You can care about someone's pain without making it your internal weather. You can say, I'm not in the right place for this right now. And that sentence is not cold. It is honest. And honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, is a form of respect for them and for yourself. Now the third thing is where it starts to get quiet and dangerous, because this one doesn't announce itself. Nobody asks you directly. Nobody says, I want access to your decisions. They say something softer. Are you sure about this? I'm just worried. I don't know. If it were me, I'd think about it differently. And because it comes wrapped in concern, because it comes from people who are close to you, you let them in. You let them sit at the table of a decision that doesn't belong to them. And then you let them in again and again, until the table is full of other people's concerns and your own voice is the quietest one in the room. This is how people lose direction without ever having it taken from them. They hand it over, incrementally, voluntarily, in exchange for the comfort of feeling considered. And the cost is invisible until one day you look at the shape of your life and realize it was built more by accommodation than by intention, more by what others were comfortable with than by what you actually wanted. The mechanism that keeps this going is explanation. Because the moment you start explaining a decision to someone who didn't ask, you've opened a negotiation. And in a negotiation, authority is shared. And once the authority over your choices is shared, something shifts. You stop deciding and start defending. And defenders don't move forward. They hold position. Your life is not a position to be held. It's a direction to be chosen. This doesn't mean closing yourself off. It means being deliberate about who gets access before the decision is made, and understanding the difference between someone who helps you think and someone who wants to steer you. The person who helps you think asks questions and then hands it back. The person who wants to steer doesn't stop when you've decided. They follow up, they revisit, they express concern about your outcome in a way that keeps the conversation open even after you've closed it. The answer to that is not aggression, it is brevity. I've thought this through. This works for me. No further elaboration. Not because you are above accountability, but because you are the only person who will live the consequences of this choice. And that fact alone grants you the authority to make it without a committee. Nobody else carries your regrets. Nobody else receives what your choices return. So nobody else gets a vote equal to yours. When that actually lands, not as a concept, but as something you act on, the whole machinery of external influence loses its lever. Let me pause here for a second, because at this point, if you've been tracking this, there's a version of yourself that's nodding along and thinking, okay, I understand the pattern. Protect my time. Set limits on emotional availability. Stop explaining my decisions. Got it. That's the answer, and I want to be honest with you, that's not the answer, that's the surface of the answer. And if you stop there, if you go away with a list of behaviors to implement, you will hold them for a week, maybe two. Feel the discomfort when people push back. Feel the guilt when someone looks disappointed, and quietly slide back into the familiar shape, because the behaviors are downstream. What's actually running this is something older and quieter. The real question, the one underneath all 5 of the things we're going to cover, is this. Do you actually believe, at the level that produces behavior rather than just thought, that your needs are as real as other people's? Not intellectually. In the moment, when someone is looking at you with expectation, when the room would be easier if you just said yes, when saying no means someone is going to be uncomfortable, and that discomfort is going to be somehow associated with you. In that moment, do you act like someone whose needs are real? Or do you act like someone who is still, at some quiet level, asking permission to have any? Because if it's the second one, and for most people watching this, at least in some area of their life it is, then no strategy is going to hold. The strategies require a foundation, and the foundation is the belief that you are allowed to take up space, not because you've earned it, not because you're performing well enough. Because you exist. That's not something you can think your way into. It's something you build through repeated small choices where you act as if it's true before it fully feels true. That's how identity changes. Not through insight, through behavior, through doing the harder thing in the small moment consistently until the belief follows the action. And this brings us to the 4th thing, the one that most disciplined, thoughtful people get most wrong. Your silence. Silence looks like restraint. It looks like maturity. It looks like rising above. And sometimes it is all of those things. But there is another kind of silence. And if you are the kind of person who prides themselves on being controlled, on not being reactive, on not letting things get to you, this one is aimed directly at you. There is a silence that comes from genuine indifference to noise. And there is a silence that comes from fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of being perceived as difficult. Fear of making things awkward in a way you'll have to live with. And these 2 silences look identical from the outside, but they cost completely different things. The fear silence, the one where someone says something that diminishes you, some comment that lands just hard enough before being wrapped in a joke, some sarcasm that has teeth but is deniable, and you let it pass. You tell yourself it's not worth it. You tell yourself you're above it. But what you're actually telling yourself is that your dignity is less important than the comfort of this moment. And the person who crossed the line doesn't experience your silence as restraint. They experience it as permission. maybe not consciously. But the absence of consequence is still a data point, and it gets filed, and the next time, the line is already further back. This is how people who would never allow themselves to be treated badly end up being treated badly, not through one invasion, through many small, unchallenged moments, through a slow accumulation of lines that kept moving because nothing was ever said. The answer is not confrontation. It is one sentence, once, delivered without heat. That comment wasn't necessary. I'd rather you not speak to me that way. That's not something I'm going to let pass. Not a speech, not an ultimatum. A calm, clear, complete statement. And then, and this is the part that matters, you watch the response. Because that response is a diagnostic. Someone with self-awareness will pause. They'll register it. The discomfort in that moment is the feeling of a real boundary being understood. Someone who was relying on your silence, consciously or not, will deflect, will call you sensitive, will make it about your reaction rather than their behavior. And that tells you everything, not just about this moment, about the whole relationship and what it has actually been. Silence chosen from strength is strategy. Silence chosen from fear is surrender. And surrender always has a cost. It just gets paid slowly, in the currency of your own self-respect. Peace that depends on you making yourself smaller is not peace. It is the absence of conflict. And those are not the same thing. If something in the last few minutes hit something real, if you recognized yourself in the silence, in the explanation, in the emotional labor, share this with someone who needs it. Not because they'll thank you for it, because it might be the thing that names what they haven't been able to name yet. That matters. Now, the fifth thing, and this one is the most emotionally complex because it lives inside something that feels like virtue, unlimited second chances. Forgiveness is real, forgiveness is necessary, but there is a version of forgiveness that has been weaponized against you, not by other people, but by your own decency. The story goes, only cold, unforgiving people close doors on others. Compassionate people stay. Compassionate people give another chance. Compassionate people don't give up on someone. And because you want to be compassionate, because you've built part of your identity around not being the kind of person who abandons others, you stay. You give the next chance, and the next. Each time with genuine hope that this time something will be different. But here is the thing that Stoic thinking gets right, and most people find uncomfortable. Character is revealed through patterns, not through promises. Words are effortless. Apologies are effortless. The thing that is not effortless is behavioral change sustained over time. And if you look honestly at the people you've given the most chances to, the pattern is almost always the same. Harm, apology, relief, repetition. Not because they're evil, because the cycle works. It continues as long as you keep participating. Every time you excuse the same behavior, you are not just sending a message to them. You are sending a message to yourself. You are telling yourself that your experience of being harmed is less important than preserving the connection. You are telling yourself that your boundaries are flexible, that your pain is negotiable, and over time, you start to brace. You start to move smaller around certain people, not because they're powerful, but because your nervous system has learned to expect the disappointment that's coming. That is not a relationship. That is a managed anticipation of damage. Forgiveness does not require continued access. You can release resentment without reopening the door. You can understand someone, genuinely, without bitterness, and still choose distance. Distance is not punishment. Distance is protection. And protection is not cruelty. It is the basic act of taking your own experience seriously. The Stoic understanding here is precise, and it's worth sitting with. You are not responsible for whether someone changes. You are not responsible for the lessons they take or don't take from your absence. Some people will reflect when access ends. Some people will never change at all. Your role is identical in both cases. Step back, without announcement, without drama, without the long explanation that gives them one more opportunity to talk you back into the cycle. Quiet, calm, final. And when people respond to that with accusations, when they call you cold, When they say you've changed, when they frame your self-protection as betrayal, understand what's actually happening. They are experiencing the removal of something they had come to rely on. Your tolerance, your willingness to reset, your capacity to absorb harm and return to the starting position. That was a resource to them. And they're responding to its removal the way anyone responds to losing something they depended on. That response is not your responsibility to fix. Here is the line that I want you to carry out of this. The most self-respecting response is sometimes the quietest one. Not the speech, not the confrontation, not the final message that explains everything you should have said months ago. The quiet removal of access. The calm that comes from knowing you're done. Not angry, not bitter, just done. That is strength. That is what it looks like when someone has finally stopped negotiating their own worth. Let's come back to where this started. You are the most reliable person in the room. You are the one who shows up, absorbs the weight, adjusts the schedule, softens the answer, gives the benefit of the doubt again. And from the outside, it looks like strength. And sometimes it is strength. But sometimes, and you know which times, it is something else. It is the performance of someone who doesn't yet fully believe they're allowed to stop. The 5 things we walked through today, your time, your emotional labor, your decisions, your silence, your unlimited forgiveness, they're not separate problems. They're the same problem. They're all downstream from the same question. Whether you believe at the level that counts, that your needs are real and your limits are legitimate, and your life is yours to author rather than manage for everyone else's comfort. That belief is not a feeling you wait for. It is a choice you make. In the small moment, before the reflex fires, when everything in you wants to give the easy answer, you pause. You choose the harder thing. You do it again tomorrow, and eventually, not immediately, but eventually, the person who does that without thinking stops being someone you're trying to become. They become who you are. You are not obligated to be available to people who don't value your time. You are not obligated to carry weight that was never yours. You are not obligated to explain a life you built. You are not obligated to absorb disrespect in silence. You are not obligated to keep reopening a wound to prove that you're kind. Kindness that costs you yourself is not kindness. It is disappearance with a pleasant face. Stop disappearing. If this opened something, if something across the last few minutes touched a pattern you've been living inside without being able to name it, leave one sentence below. Not a reaction. Something true. The one thing you've been giving that you know, if you're honest, you should have protected. Say it once. It means more than you think. The people building something in themselves, not just watching but actually working on this, are who this channel is for. Subscribe and stay. We're going somewhere with this, one conversation at a time. Next time, we're going to look at something most people completely misread. Why the person in the room who talks the least is almost always the one with the most control, and what they know about silence that the rest of the room doesn't. That question is worth sitting with before the answer comes.